Welcome to the Pasho Perspective, a place where I share my perspective on everything in the space between life and death. I am your host, Pasho. Well, my Pachos Chachos, we are now on Act 1, Scene 4 of the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. If you'll remember from last week, Juliet is now preparing herself to have a party where Paris is going to attempt to win her heart. Meanwhile, the boys are planning on crashing said party so that Romeo can gawk over Rosaline, and so Benvolio and the rest of his friends can attempt to show him that there are other girls perhaps that he can dote over instead of being heartbroken because Rosaline has rejected him. So at the beginning of Scene 4, we are now in a street near the Capulet house. So the boys, Romeo, Mercutio, Benvolio, and 5 or 6 other maskers and torchbearers are on their way to the party. Now you might be wondering, how is it possible that the sworn enemy of the Capulets will be able to get into the house? And the answer is quite simple. There are maskers, meaning this is a masquerade. They're going to be covering their faces, and so nobody will know that they are from the house of Montague. So we begin. Romeo says, "What? Shall this speech be spoke for our excuse? Or shall we on without apology?" In other words, should we send a messenger to let them know that we're coming on our way? Or should we just show up without anybody introducing us? And Benvolio, remember his cousin, says, "The date is out of such prolixity. We'll have no Cupid hoodwinked with a scarf, bearing a Tartar's painted bow of lath, scaring the ladies like a crow keeper with no without book prologue faintly spoke after the prompter for our entrance. But let them measure us by what they will. We'll measure them a measure and be gone." So in other words, Benvolio is saying, no, we're not going to send somebody to introduce the fact that we're there. We're not going to be staying very long. We're going to dance. Let them measure us by that dance, and we're going to be out. And so Romeo is not really in the mood again. Remember, he's heartbroken over Rosaline denying him. And so, like a very sad emo kid, he says, "Give me a torch. I am not for this ambling. Being but heavy, I will bear the light." Mercutio, who is his best friend and a kinsman of the prince, loves Romeo and wants him to be in a better mood. So he says, "Nay, gentle Romeo, we must have you dance," right? Mercutio wants him to be light on his feet. And Romeo, again, being the depressed little kid that he is, says that he's heavy, right? With burden and sorrow and grief and all that other baggage that he comes with. So Romeo responds, "Not I, believe me. You have dancing shoes with nimble soles. I have a soul of lead, so stakes me to the ground I cannot move." Which you gotta love the pun there, because the sole of a shoe is the bottom part of the shoe, which stakes him to the ground, but his soul spelled S-O-U-L in the lines. You know, very clever. And Mercutio says, "Well, you are a lover. Borrow Cupid's wings and soar with them above a common bound." Romeo says, "I am too sore and pierced with his shaft, too sore with his light feathers, and so bound I cannot bound a pitch above dull woe. Under love's heavy burden do I sink." "And to sink in it," Mercutio responds, "should you burden love? Too great oppression for a tender thing." Is love a tender thing? It is too rough, too rude, too boisterous, and it pricks like thorn. Mercutio responds, if love be rough with you, be rough with love. Prick love for pricking, and you beat love down. Give me a case to put my visage in, a visor for a visor. What care I what curious eye doth quote deformities? Here are the beetle brows shall blush for me. Which I always stop at this line because I think it is so telling of what Mercutio is here in the story. Now, there's a term in literature called a foil, spelled like aluminum foil, but in this case, it is a character that has opposite characteristics of another character, and we pair them side by side to exaggerate and to highlight those differences, right? And so Romeo, we're introduced, is very handsome and good looking, and he's sensitive, right? But he has zero game, zero confidence. And here Mercutio, is asking one of his servants to give him a mask to put onto his face, because he even says, I've got deformities on my face. I've got these big bushy brows. So what do I care, right? Let me put a mask on and I'm still going to, try to get some game. And so here Mercutio is not very attractive, but has all the confidence in the world, and so the ideal, right, would be to be like both, to be good looking and sensitive like Romeo, but also confident and strong like Mercutio. But we shall continue. So Benvolio interrupts them and says, "Come, knock and enter, and no sooner in, but every man betake him to his legs," right? Reminding everybody at the party, we are here to dance, and then we're getting out, because again, they are the enemy of the Capulets, and they don't want to get caught and to get in trouble. Romeo says, "A torch for me," right? Again, he doesn't want to dance. "Let wanton light of heart tickle the senseless rushes with their heels. For I am proverbed with the grandsire phrase, I'll be a candle holder and look on. The game was ne'er so fair, and I am done." Right? Again, his emo self comes out and says, "I'm just going to watch. You guys have fun. You're in the mood. I'm not." And so Mercutio is not going to take that. And he says, "Tut, done's the mouse," the constable's own word, right? Because he said, "I am done." And now he's making a play on words of done, D-U-N, meaning poop. And so he says, "If thou art done," spelled the same way as poop, "we'll draw thee from the mire," which is a pile of poop, "of, save your reverence, love, wherein thou stickest up to the ears. Come, we burn daylight, ho." All right, so again, he's not calling him a hoe. He is saying, we're burning daylight, so let's get to the party, right, before it's too late. And Romeo is just not having it, right? And he says, "Nay, that's not so," right? That I'm not in a pile of poop, and love's not poop. And Mercutio says, "I mean, sir, in delay we waste our lights in vain, like lamps by day. Take our good meaning, for our good judgment sits 5 times in that ear once are in our 5 wits." All right, and so he says, "No, I mean it, like the day is burning out, so we need to go." And Romeo says, "And we mean well in going to this mask, but 'tis no wit to go." Right, again, he's reminding him there's no reason for us to crash this party. It's not a good idea. And Mercutio says, "Why, may one ask?" And now listen to this lovely wordplay. "I dreamt a dream tonight, and so did I. Well, what was yours? That dreamers often lie in bed asleep while they do dream things true. Oh, then I see Queen Mab hath been with you." So here now we begin with Mercutio's monologue. Remember, a monologue is a long, uninterrupted speech where one character is at least talking to one other character, if not several others, and we in the audience become an extension of that audience as well. So Mercutio is going to start talking about this fictional character that Shakespeare created called Queen Mab. And in order for you to kind of understand what he's talking about, imagine a miniature version of like the Tooth Fairy. But instead of the Tooth Fairy, it does the job of the Sandman, right? The one who is responsible for giving you dreams. And so Mercutio, in this rant, is going to try to convince Romeo that dreams are nonsense, right? Given to you by a pretty spiteful person who doesn't like it when people are happy and kind of gives them bad dreams, which I think kind of reveals the state that Mercutio is in, where, he kind of loses himself towards the end and he starts screaming at the sky. And so, ironically, in an attempt to pick Romeo up, Romeo has to then calm him down at the end. And so listen to the wordplay at the end between him and Romeo, as we discuss this, because it's really neat the way that Shakespeare wrote things. So he says, "She is the fairy's midwife, and she comes in shape no bigger than an agate stone on the forefinger of an alderman, drawn with a team of little anatomies athwart men's noses as they lie asleep. her wagon spokes made of long spinner's legs, the cover of the wings of grasshoppers, her traces of the smallest spider's web, her collars of the moonshine's watery beams, her whip of cricket's bone, the lash of film, her wagoner a small gray-coated gnat, not half so big as a round little worm pricked from the lazy finger of a maid. Her chariot is an empty hazelnut, made by the joiner's squirrel or old grub, time out of mind the fairies' coachmakers. And in this state she gallops night by night through lovers' brains, and then they dream of love. Over courtiers' knees they dream on curtsy straight, over lawyers' fingers who straight dream on fees, over ladies' lips who straight on kisses dream, which oft the angry mab with blisters plagues, because their breath with sweet meats are tainted are. Sometimes she gallops over a courtier's nose, and then dreams he of smelling out a suit. And sometimes comes she with a tithe pig's tail, tickling a parson's nose as a lie's asleep, then dreams he of another benefice. Sometimes she driveth over a soldier's neck, and then dreams he of cutting foreign throats, of breaches, ambuscados, Spanish blades, of healths 5 fathom deep, and then anon drum in his ear, at which he starts and wakes, and thus being frighted swears a prayer or two, and sleeps again. This is that very mab that plaits the manes of horses in the night, and bakes the elf-locks and foul sluttish hairs, which once untangled much misfortune bodes. This is the hag, when maids lie on their backs, that presses them and learns them first to bear, making them women of good carriage. This is she! And he screams to the sky, and so Romeo stretches out his hand and grabs him by the shoulder, which startles him but brings him back into reality. And Romeo says to his friend, "Peace, peace, Mercutio, peace. Thou talk'st of nothing." And Sir Mercutio reminds him then of his point. "True, I talk of dreams, which are the children of an idle brain, begot of nothing but vain fantasy, which is as thin of substance as the air, and more inconstant than the wind, who woos even now the frozen bosom of the north, and being angered puffs away from thence, turning his face to the dew-dropping south." And Benvolio, hearing that, says, "This wind you talk of blows us from ourselves. Supper is done and we shall come too late," right? He's saying, come on, we're going to miss the dancing with you guys talking out here. And so Romeo gives us the first foreshadow of the story. And he says to us, "I fear too early, for my mind misgives some consequence, yet hanging in the stars, shall bitterly begin his fearful date with this night's revels, and expire the term of a despised life closed in my breast by some vile forfeit of untimely death." So in other words, he's like, I have a bad feeling about this. I had a dream that because I go to this party, I die sooner than I'm supposed to. But again, peer pressure is very difficult to deny your friend and your family. And so he gives in and says, "But he that hath the steerage of my course, direct my sail. On, lusty gentlemen!" And Benvolio screams, "Strike drum!" and exeunt, right? Multiple people exiting the stage. And so I have to kind of talk about the last 2 lines that Romeo says there, because, it's kind of Shakespeare winking at himself, right? He that hath the steerage of my course, right? Whoever is responsible for my destiny, direct my sail. I mean, that's Shakespeare, right? He is essentially the creator of Romeo. And so as we may say to the Lord to direct our sail, right? To not allow our ego to get in the way of what he wants intended for us, and so it's kind of cute, Shakespeare winking at himself, ha ha ha. And then again, reminding them that they are there to gawk at women, right? Lusty gentlemen. And so they go. And that is the end of scene 4. So now we get to the fantastic scene 5, where Romeo and Juliet are going to meet. And the reactions are funny. And as we have kind of discussed before in regards to how Shakespeare wrote, anytime we have a scene where there's talks of death or suicide or anything really serious, Shakespeare likes to break up the tension with a humorous scene. And usually the humorous scenes will include the servants or chefs and different people in the house. And it's kind of, the jokes for the people who sit in the pit, those who did not have titles or anything like that. And it just kind of, I think, showed little vignettes of everyday life that the, average person could relate to. And so the beginning of scene 5 opens now in the hall of Capulet's house, right? The party is going on. Serving men are coming back and forth with napkins. And the first serving man says, "Where's Pot Pan?" Right? Pot Pan is one of the servants that he helps not to take away. He shift a trencher. He scrape a trencher, right? So the first serving man's upset with this guy Pot Pan because he hasn't seen him and he doesn't think he's doing any work. And the second serving man says, "When good manners shall lie all in one or two men's hands, and they unwashed too, 'tis a foul thing." Right? And so he's kind of saying, yeah, man, he's staining us, then we have to do more work. And the first serving man responds, "Away with the joint stools, remove the court cupboard, look to the plate. Good thou, save me a piece of marchpane, and as thou lovest me, let the porter let in Susan Grindstone and Nell." And then enters Anthony and Pot Pan, the guy they were looking for, exits the second servant. And so the first serving man says, "Anthony and Pot Pan." And the second serving man says, "Aye, boy, ready." And then he says, "You are looked for and called for, asked for and sought for in the great chamber." And so Pot Pan says, "Well, we cannot be here and there too. Cheerily, boys, be brisk a while, and the longer liver take all." Which I think the joke here is that Pot Pan has been drinking it up with his friend Anthony. And anytime there's a glass laid on the table and they go off dancing, they pick it up. And so he's kind of putting out a challenge to all of them. Like, let's see who can get the most wasted while while our masters are distracted with each other and their backs are turned. And so, obviously the servants who don't get to enjoy those kind of festivities and things could probably relate to that idea that the only time they really got to get turned, as it were, was when the masters' backs were turned and they can, kind of sneak in a drink here or there. And so, you can kind of imagine the pit, all the people in the pit are kind of giggling and laughing, and everybody in the balcony is kind of looking down their noses at them like, "Oh, I knew it, kind of thing." And so maskers appear with Capulet, Lord Capulet, and Lady Capulet. Juliet also enters the stage, all the guests and servants, right? And so it is a full party. Now, that ominous warning that Romeo says that death is going to be coming, right? Because of this distraction by the serving men, we have released, right, some of that catharsis, some of that tension. And so now we're ready to be regaled, right? And so Lord Capulet, seeing everybody with a mask on, not knowing that they are the House of Montague, "Welcome, gentlemen. Ladies that have their toes unplagued with corns will have a bout with you. Aha, my mistresses, which of you all now will deny to dance? She that makes dainty, she I'll swear hath corns. Am I come near ye now? Welcome, gentlemen. I have seen the day that I have worn a visor and can tell a whispering tale in a fair lady's ear, such as would please. 'Tis gone, 'tis gone, 'tis gone. You are welcome, gentlemen. Come, musicians, play. A hall, give room, and foot it, girls." And the music plays and they begin to dance. So let's pause there for a second and go back to what Lord Capulet was saying here, which is kind of, funny and clever. In order to get the girls to not be shy and not dance, he says to the guys, ask them to dance. And if the girl denies you a dance, it's because her feet are all jacked up, right? And so what girl wants a guy to think that of her? Even if it's true, you don't want anybody to know and to think that. And so they're not going to deny any guy who asks them to dance, and thus they're going to participate in the dancing, and it should then be a good time for everyone, right? And so he kind of tells the boys, when I was younger, I know how to, get a girl's attention, but, he recognizes, that those days are gone, and it's gone. And then he strikes up the music, right? And so he commands, more light, you knaves, and turn the tables up, and quench the fire, the room is grown too hot, right? So the dinner is now over. They're clearing the room so that it is available for dancing. Ah, sirrah, this unlooked for sport comes well. Nay, sit, good cousin Capulet, for you and I are past our dancing days. How long is't now since last yourself and I were in a mask? All right, so he sees his cousin and he's like, hey, buddy, what's going on, right? How long has it been since we were young in a masquerade hitting on girls? And so his cousin says, by your lady, 30 years, right? And so his wife is 30. If you subtract that from, Juliet's 13, right? I guess when she was 17, she had Juliet. So definitely older than Juliet. Not really sincere when she says, I was, much your mother around these years, give 3 more. And so Capulet says, 30 years, what man? 'Tis not so much, 'tis not so much. 'Tis since the nuptial of Lucentio. Come Pentecost, as quickly as it will, some 25 years, and then we massed. All right, so he's like, not 30 years, 25. And his cousin says, no, 'tis more, 'tis more. His son is elder, sir. His son is 30. All right, so Capulet says, will you tell me that his son was but a ward 2 years ago? Right, isn't that how our memory works as we get older? Being young seems so near to us, as opposed to so far away. That time passes so quickly. And I mean, it's so hard to pay attention to the days because they come. And as you grow older, you recognize how limited they are, which makes them even more valuable and precious. And so, you have your typical conversation of the elderlies at the party, going back with a little nostalgia of when they were young. And so now, Romeo. He says to a servingman, what lady's that which doth enrich the hand of yonder knight? In other words, he sees Juliet for the first time. And Juliet is with a guy dressed up as a knight, because again, it's a masquerade. And in the Leonardo DiCaprio version, at least, that yonder knight is Paris, right? And so Paris is trying to win Juliet's heart. And the servant says to him, I know not, sir. And Romeo says, oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. It seems she hangs upon the cheek of night like a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear. Beauty too rich for use, for earth too dear. So shows a snowy dove trooping with crows as yonder lady over her fellow shows. The measure done, I'll watch her place of stand, and touching hers, make blessed my rude hand. Did my heart love till now? Forswear its sight, for I never saw true beauty till this night. So, I mean, I don't know how deep that love is, right? Because again, he said he loved Rosaline because she was so beautiful and the all-seeing sun had never seen such a beauty. And boom, I mean, like that, drops Rosaline from his mind. He's like, have I ever loved till now? Like, I mean, that's why you were depressed until this moment. And I mean, it's love at first sight, right? I mean, he just admits, I've never seen anybody more beautiful. And so his plan is, the measure done, meaning when the song is over, I'm going to watch where she stands. I'm going to sidle up next to her, and I'm going to touch her hand with my hand, thus making my hand blessed, right? Because he's apparently put her already on a pedestal. She is a shrine, and again, you really have to ask, what about Juliet does Romeo love? I mean, he's never even spoken to her. And yet he has this notion that it is love. And so, I try to warn my students to be careful with that kind of stuff because, that seems a little superficial to me. And the fact that he was so enamored with Rosaline, also because of her beauty, I question the depth of Romeo's love. Often, as I did too when I was young, we misconstrue love for lust. And that we eat with our eyes, as it were, but it may not necessarily be the best thing for either party. And so, I mean, it's very complimentary. I don't want to take away from the beauty of the lines. I mean, to say that Juliet is so beautiful and so radiant that she teaches fire how to shine, is pretty incredible. the idea of a rich jewel like a diamond hanging with the backdrop of a Nubian skin of an Ethiop's neck, because it's hanging from her ear, that beautiful juxtaposition and contrast. Again, he's saying, that Juliet looks like this dove, this white, beautiful dove, with all the other girls of Verona looking like crows, with that, again, that setting of a dark setting. And so it is beautiful, but it's just so fast, it's so sudden, but we'll let the characters speak for themselves in that regard. So unbeknownst to Romeo, but knownst to us, Tybalt had heard Romeo say this out loud. And apparently Tybalt hates Romeo so much that he can even recognize him by his voice. And so Tybalt says this by his voice should be a Montague. And he commands one of his servants, "Fetch me my rapier, boy." "What? Dares the slave come hither covered with an antic face to fleer and scorn at our solemnity?" Right? And so Tybalt thinks that Romeo is there to crash the party, to laugh at them and to make them look silly. And so he says, "Now by the stock and honor of my kin, to strike him dead, I hold it not a sin." Right? So he just got his sword. He's storming his way to Romeo to pretty much slash him in the heart right there in front of everybody. But lucky for Romeo, Lord Capulet notices this aggression and gets in the way and blocks Tybalt and says, "Why, how now, kinsman? Wherefore storm you so?" Right? He can tell you're very aggressive right now. This is a party. And so Tybalt tells him, "Uncle, this is a Montague, our foe, a villain that is hither come in spite to scorn at our solemnity this night." So again, he even tells Lord Montague, he must be here to be laughing at us. He is a villain, and keep that villain in mind, because villain is like the worst thing you can call a person. You got to remember, this is the time of chivalry. People wanted to be heroes. To be a villain is disgusting, unlike today where, being the Joker or being in the Suicide Squad or being in, Antifa is supposed to be cool or something. I mean, it's ridiculous. But in those days, to be a villain was terrible. We got to bring that back. We should all aspire to be heroes in our own lives or in the lives of our community. Nobody should aspire to be a villain. I promise you there would be less shootings in the world. There'd be less violence, less crime, if people would start living more nobly like that and take being called a villain, so negatively, and to recognize that we are here to do something good. We are here to be some sort of hero, if not to ourselves, at least for our family or to our neighbors, but something. So I digress. So Tybalt wants to slash Romeo in the heart, and Capulet says, "Young Romeo, is it?" And Tybalt says, "'Tis he, that villain Romeo." It's like, yo, you don't have to use that language, kid. So Lord Capulet says, "Content thee, gentle coz, let him alone, and bury him like a portly gentleman. And to say truth, Verona brags of him to be a virtuous and well-governed youth. I would not, for the wealth of all this town, here in my house do him disparagement. Therefore be patient, take no note of him. It is my will, the which if you thou respect, show a fair presence and put off these frowns, an ill-beseeming semblance for a feast." Right? And so here's something very interesting. Because most of the story, when I was first introduced to Romeo and Juliet, it was forbidden love. But is it really forbidden, or was it perceived by the children as forbidden? Because here, Capulet just admits to Tybalt that I hear Verona says that he's a pretty good, virtuous, well-governed guy. I've only heard good things. And I wouldn't disrespect him here in front of all these people. And so if Juliet perhaps had been honest with her father and said, "Dad, I love him," maybe things would have been different. But again, why at a certain age do teenagers close their door to their parents and they don't let them in? Like they feel they have to carry their own cross, and you don't. Even adults don't have to carry their own cross. You have a church, you have a community, you have a spouse, you have a family who would all take the burden, or at least a little bit for you, as you would probably do for them. And so Lord Capulet instructs him and says, "Look, if you respect me, you will leave him alone. You will change your faces, right? Because you guys look a little aggressive right now, and that's not good for a party. And just go. So Tybalt, he's not happy, right? I mean, again, he wants the peacock. And he says, it fits when such a villain is a guest. I'll not endure him, right? So Tybalt says, no way. I'm not going to let him stay here. And so Lord Capulet now really pulls him to the side. He tells him, he shall be endured. What, good man, boy? I say he shall go too. Am I the master here or you? Go to. You'll not endure him? God shall mend my soul. You'll make a mutiny among my guests. You will set a cock-a-hoop. You'll be the man. And so in other words, he's telling him, hey, who's in charge here? You're not going to listen to me? I told you to endure him. You will endure him. What do you think you're going to do? You start a fight with Romeo, and you don't think there's people at this party who are friends with the Montagues as well as us? You don't think that's going to force them to have to make a choice? And what if they choose the Montagues? You think I'm going to have that disrespect and in my house? And so Tybalt, not to be deterred, says, why, uncle, 'tis a shame. And Capulet smacks him around a little bit and says, go to, go to. You are a saucy boy, is it so indeed? This trick may chance to scathe you, I know what. You must contrary me. Marry, 'tis time, well said, my hearts. You are a prince cox, go. Be quiet, or more light, for shame. I'll make you quiet. What? Cheerily, my hearts, right? And so there's like a mid-conversation where he's speaking to servants and he's yelling at Tybalt at the same time. But he pretty much tells him, look, you do what I say, or there's going to be problems, right? And so Tybalt says, patience perforce with willful choler meeting makes my flesh tremble in their different greeting. I will withdraw, but this intrusion shall, by now seeming sweet, convert to bitter gall. And he exits the stage. And so remember this, because this is going to be floating in the air once the act is over. When is Tybalt going to get revenge, and how is he going to get his revenge? Right? Because he is under the delusion that Romeo was there specifically to make fun of them, where we know, right, the dramatic irony when the audience knows what the characters do not, we know that Romeo was simply there to stare at Rosaline, but ironically, instead of Rosaline, he sees Juliet and falls in love with her, right? And so now, during this time, Romeo has found a comfortable spot next to Juliet, and he reaches his hand out and he touches hers and holds it in his hands for a second before she pulls it away in shock. And he says, if I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle fine is this, my lips, two blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. Right? And so he says, if I have stained your shrine, right, you are my shrine of which I worship. If I have stained you, then I will smooth that rough touch with a kiss, because I am not worthy to touch you. And Juliet says, good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. Right? So put your hands together in prayer. And she says, look, hands do kiss each other. Saints have hands and pilgrims touch their hands, and putting palm to palm is a palmer's kiss, right? And so it's really cute here, because I believe this is really the reason why Juliet prefers Romeo over Paris. Juliet likes to play with words, and Romeo loves to use puns as well with his friends. And so the fact that they can play with language together, this is, pardon the expression, a type of foreplay, where they're playing with each other's words and ideas as if they would sensually be playing with their, let's just say, bodies, and move on. So Romeo says, have not saints lips, and holy palmers too? And Juliet says, I, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer. So Romeo says, oh then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair. And Juliet, very flattered, says, saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake. And Romeo says, then move not. And you can imagine her there, then petrified. motionless, while he creeps up to her, while my prayers effect I take. Thus from my lips, by thine my sin is purged. And he kisses her, this time on the lips. So Juliet says to him, then have my lips the sin that they have took, right? Did you just pass your sin on to me by kissing me? And Romeo says, sin from my lips? Oh, trespass sweetly urged, give me my sin again, right? And so he says, fine, you want me to take that sin back? And so he kisses her again. He's like, all right, I'm it now, right? Now I have it. And Juliet says, you kiss by the book, which is like the ultimate flattery right there. Like if they could write about kisses, your kiss would be in the book. And so the nurse kind of interrupts them and she says, madam, your mother craves a word with you. And so Juliet leaves to go see her mother. And Romeo says to the nurse, what is her mother, right? Like, who is her mother? And the nurse says, Mary Bachelor. Because remember, he's still wearing his mask. Nobody knows who he is. Her mother is the lady of the house, and a good lady, and a wise and virtuous. I nursed her daughter that you talked withal. I'll tell you, he that can lay hold of her shall have the chinks. Right? And so she's kind of talking Juliet up and saying, hey, if you can get her, you get all of this stuff here. And so Romeo realizes, is she a Capulet? Oh, dear account, my life is my foe's debt. Right? And so what is Romeo's reaction when he finds out that the girl that he just flirted with for like 5 minutes is a Capulet? Does he say, all right, well, that was fun, but I should go and be more practical and realistic and find somebody else who's not the sworn enemy of my family? I mean, he does still have a choice. He still can pursue Rosaline, right? He could just cancel and say, I'm going to go a better route. I'm going to choose somebody better for me. But what does he say? No, my life is now in my enemy's hands. I have no choice, right? She has my heart. And so even if she's the enemy, there's nothing that can be done. And so Benvolio now, they're all, they finish dancing. They're on their way out, and he starts dragging Romeo along, and he says, away, be gone, the sport is at its best. And Romeo, sad to leave, says, aye, so I fear, the more is my unrest, right? Now he's like, if I thought I had problems with Rosaline, goodness, now I'm going to really have problems where I won't be able to sleep. And so Lord Capulet says to them, nay, gentlemen, prepare not to be gone. We have a trifling, foolish banquet towards. And they whisper in his ears, right? His servants start whispering in his ears, and he's like, is it even so? Why, then I thank you all, right? So they tell him, it's like, dude, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning. And they're like, oh my gosh, okay, I thank you all. I thank you, honest gentlemen. Good night. More torches here, right? Exeunt, maskers, right? So people start getting off the stage. Come on then, let's to bed. Ah, sirrah, by my fay, it waxes late. I'll to my rest. And exeunt all but Juliet and the nurse, right? So only Juliet and the nurse are on the stage. And Juliet says to the nurse, come hither. What is yon gentleman? And the nurse tells her, oh, that's the son and heir of old Tiberio. And she sees another guy going off the stage, and she says, what's he that is now going out of door? She says, oh, Mary, that I think be young Petruchio. And Juliet says, well, what's he that follows there, that would not dance? Right? Remember the guy who wasn't dancing with heavy soul? The nurse says, I know not. And so Juliet commands her, go ask his name. If he be married, my grave is like to be my wedding bed. Right? So she's like, please tell me he's single. Please tell me that there's a chance. So the nurse returns and she tells her, his name is Romeo, and a Montague, the only son of your great enemy. And so what is Juliet's response here? Does she decide, hey, I should be pragmatic and go after somebody else who won't be an issue with my parents? No. She says, my only love sprung from my only hate, too early seen unknown and known too late. Prodigious birth of love it is to me that I must love a loathed enemy. And the nurse says, what's this? What's this? And Juliet responds, a rhyme I learned even now of one I danced withal. And then somebody calls from within, Juliet! And the nurse responds, anon, anon, come, let's away, the strangers all are gone. And everyone exits the stage. And that, my friends, is the end of Act 1. I hope you've been enjoying it. If you are, please smash that subscribe button, like and share me anywhere you can. And I hope you have a wonderful week. God bless you as always. I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.